So it turns out I'm not quite done with spooky season just yet, and it's been a good few months since I've done anything Batman related, so I figure, hey, why not? Let's spice things up and talk about the show that actually introduced me to the Dark Knight, Batman Beyond. This is a pretty interesting show, the third entry in the DC animated universe, and the first attempt at making Batman hipper and more relatable by making him a high school student. Despite both of these factors, this show got dark. Even by Batman standards, and especially by DCAU standards, it can feel like a straight up horror show at some points. It's honestly surprising that I was only scarred by the movie as a toddler. It's honestly impressive they were allowed to get away with some of this at all. So with that in mind, let's explore some nightmare fuel that, by some miracle, is squeezed by censors, shall we? I wanted to start off with something mild but always weirded me out as a kid. Those two news anchors who appear in a good chunk of episodes just gave me the creeps for whatever reason. I think the hologram or lighting that's used to represent them only showing half their faces, as well as having permanent smiles that never close, just feels really off-putting. The cherry on top being they're never really shown in person as far as I can remember, so for all I know they're not even human, just some convincing fake used to tell the news. I'm probably looking way too deep into this, come to think of it. I wouldn't go so far as to call it nightmare fuel per se, just slightly uncanny. Now the actual disturbing scenes that still get me start as early as episode 3, Black Out, featuring the first appearance of Inque, who's a shapeshifter. She's cool, I like her a lot, and she's fun to watch right up until she tries to kill Terry by suffocating him from the inside. Suffocation on its own is already a pretty grisly way to kill someone, but even worse if it's from the inside out. You know, fun fact, I did the same thing for a D&D one-shot we ran with a character who is a white slime person. No one at the table is particularly happy about it, but you know what? It got results and I regret nothing. The rest of the show up to this point was still fairly dark, but typical Batman fare. This is the first instance of it really standing out to me even as a kid. It only gets worse from here though. Episode 6, Heroes. I don't have a lot to say here, so let's keep it short. This episode features a pretty obvious Fantastic Four parody, only it's revealed that their accident was actually deliberate and now they want revenge. The disturbing part to me is how they're all killed at the end of the episode. Batman straight up commits murder when he turns on the ventilation, and Mr. Fantastic is sucked into the vents and torn apart by the fan blades. Invisible Woman is dissipated during the commotion and she's essentially split in every direction with her remains just being sucked into the ventilation. And Torch Thing gets off easy by just being cooled down and beaten into submission until all that's left is a lifeless hunk of rock. I think why this feels especially disturbing is that these guys don't really deserve such a gruesome end. They're victims of their own situation, much like Mr. Freeze, and really the only reason it gets to this point is that it's mentioned in the episode that their conditions are causing them to become, I believe their friend sums it up by saying,
dangerously psychotic.
And even the main villain of the entire show didn't get this harsh of a send-off. Episode 9 is a different kind of horrifying as we get an answer to what Bane is like in his old age. Completely comatose due to his over-reliance on venom addiction. This may as well be an anti-drug PSA due to just how unsettling it is. Reminds me of an old Superman PSA that aired a few years back, come to think of it. Last particularly disturbing example in Season 1 is from Episode 11, and surprise surprise, it's another Inque episode. This one being some poor schmuck who wants to be like her, so Inque just gives him half the mixture needed, and he ends up being this half blob thing. The rest of the episode's fine, if a little weird, it's just what happens with this dude that skeeves me out. The rest of Season 1 was generally pretty dark in tone, but nothing I wouldn't call out of the ordinary for Batman stories, but Season 2 really kicked it up a notch, starting right there in the first episode, Splicers. As the title implies, it's animal gene splicing, so typical man-bat shenanigans. Terry gets turned into a man-bat at some point, which is pretty spooky, but what I consider going straight into Cronenberg territory is when Terry injects Cuvier, the big bad of the episode, with animal DNA from God knows what to turn him into what I can only describe as a walking teratoma. Thinking on it, is that scary or just gross? You make the call. Oh, speaking of scary and also gross, Earthmover. That's it. Just the episode in general. Oh, you want me to actually discuss it and elaborate on that? Okay, I consider this episode the absolute creepiest in the entire show, where one of Terry's classmates is being stalked by what turns out to be her father, who's thought to be killed in a illegal waste dumping accident where he gets covered in radiation and gives him the power of telekinesis. And he's reduced to a rotted corpse. No, that isn't just me being facetious. Look at this! What makes it exponentially worse is that his rotted corpse face is rendered in more detail than anything else in the entire show. I can practically smell the rotten radiation from here. So he's been stalking his daughter via mud avatars with the intent to bring her underground with him forever. As well as get revenge on his former business partner for what happened to him. Oh, and he sounds like this.
Not accident. Not accident.
So yeah, I skimmed through it pretty quick, but I do consider this one of, if not the most unsettling episode of the entire show, and it still gives me the creeps no matter how many times I've seen it. And it's so infamous that if you Google Batman Beyond Nightmare Fuel, this is the first dozen or so results, as well as the main image for the TV tropes page. And it looks like they didn't get it out of their system yet, so the very next episode is just as disturbing, if not worse. Lost Soul. If you watched my childhood trauma Halloween video, you'll already know why this is so creepy, so I'll try and keep it brief. Basically, some rich business dude dies and has his brain copied as a computer program, and the obvious issue is his digital face is just haunting to look at. So the actual plot kicks in as he wants to upload his mind into his grandson, but first as a temporary body he takes over the Batsuit. Only problem being there's already a fleshy annoyance wearing it. So how does he get rid of him? Oh, by forcing Terry to walk into the ocean and force him to drown himself. Yeah. Once again, drowning is already a pretty bad to die, but this makes it go the extra mile into horror territory. So you may be asking what'll happen to the grandson's mind once his grandfather takes over. Well, in his own words,
where will I be?
Wherever deleted programs go.
I think the worst part of all this is how he's dealt with. Terry manages to delete his file and we hear his memories being deleted as he's reverting all the way back to baby.
Pi r squared.
2 + 2 = 4.
Me first. I want to play. 1 potato, 2 potato. Mom.
Okay, who the
Frag
wrote these two episodes specifically? A few writers, but mainly Stan Berkowitz. Mr. Berkowitz, are you okay? Is there something you need to talk about? These episodes creep me out, so let's move on. So, Season 2, Episode 6, Bloodsport. No, not that one. Okay, closer, but not that one either. It's the name of the episode, not a character. This was actually a pretty fun episode for the most part, as Terry fights what essentially is his Kraven the Hunter analog, but there's really only one scene I want to bring up here. So the Stalker, the antagonist for this episode, needed to be cybernetically enhanced after a panther he was hunting broke his back. Honestly, he should consider himself lucky that's all that happened to him, considering he got in a fight with a panther. Issue is apparently the doctors doing this weren't legitimate because it's made abundantly clear they didn't feel the need to put him under, so the surgery is especially gruesome as a result. And there's just one last episode I'd like to highlight. Again, this isn't really a horror episode until you think about what ends up happening to the antagonist. This unfortunate soul is Ian Peake, a sleazy journalist who finds out Terry and Bruce's identities and threatens to expose them for views. Which is utterly reprehensible, don't get me wrong, but again, what gets me is how this fate feels utterly horrific in comparison to what he actually did. So his intangibility belt he uses to get dirt on celebrities, I swear it makes sense in context, turns out to be glitchy and he can't control his phasing abilities any longer, so he begins phasing through the earth itself and there's nothing Terry can do to save it. The worst part about the situation is Bruce's completely nonchalant reaction to all this.
What's gonna happen to him?
My guess, he'll keep right on falling till he reaches the center of the earth. It's about as inside as you can get.
This is someone who's repeatedly gone out of his way to save the Joker of all people on multiple occasions, but he's standing there just making jokes while letting this journalist go through what's most certainly a fate worse than death. Speaking of the Joker, this show is already bleak enough, but they really cut loose with the movie Return of the Joker. Perks of being a direct-to-video movie instead of a Saturday morning cartoon, I guess. Whenever Joker is on screen, this immediately turns into a horror movie. But I think this is best exemplified in the flashback. I've already discussed what he did to Robin in the previous childhood trauma video, so I'll just breeze past that part, even though it's easily the most disturbing part about all this. It's just so unsettling hearing him regale Batman with the story of how he utterly ruined this child as if it's a family vacation video. And the icing on the cake, and the part that really bothered me as a kid, is when JJ finally breaks through the brainwashing, kills Joker, and just promptly breaks down. Why did that get under my skin more than the actual torture? Good question. Your guess is as good as mine. And we're not done tormenting poor Tim just yet, as we discover he was the Joker this entire time. Kinda? So in the midst of all the torture, Joker had the foresight to implant a microchip, keeping a backup of his consciousness for safekeeping, which we discover when Tim starts remembering and has a full-blown PTSD attack remembering what Joker did, which is when Joker comes out to play in the most terrifying way they could possibly get away with. Oh, and remember that microchip I mentioned just a little bit ago? That was going to be foreshadowed at the beginning of the movie before getting cut. Did any of you wonder while watching why the opening credits for the movie is just white text on a black background? Well, so did I. And while researching for this video, I found out why, and holy
frag,
it's pretty grim, even more than the pure black credits. So I discovered the original opening credits, which even the uncensored edition of the movie didn't have, starting with pure black before seeing what looks like vague brain cell shapes, zooming out to seeing full neurons and eventually brain tissue, and finally actual brain tissue, with techno bits just crudely jammed in. Now, this doesn't seem very gruesome at first until you think about the implications. Now, promise me, person watching this, that you'll think of the implications.
no! Are you frightened?
Doesn't seem all that bad until you realize we essentially just watched the chip get shoved into Tim's brain. Now, why was this entire opening cut, I hear you ask? Well, I've heard a couple of conflicting reports. The first being that it was too dark, which I seriously doubt considering everything else this show and this movie got away with up to this point. The other answer, which is the answer I personally put more stock in, is that it's a pretty hefty spoiler when you come to think about it. Sure, you wouldn't know who or why, but you'd be able to glean that tech implanted in someone's brain is a pretty important aspect of the plot. Now that's what I think is the more likely reason though, but we won't really know for sure until someone can get a concrete answer straight from the source. So yeah, with all that in mind, not to mention the fairly serious subject matter of quite a few episodes and the movie itself, I feel pretty confident in saying Batman Beyond is by far the darkest the DCAU ever got. And I want to clarify one thing. I may say that all this was dark and horrifying, but it's not bad by any means. Batman Beyond is some of the best this animated universe has to offer, in large part because the crew doesn't talk down to their audience. That said, all I could wonder while researching for this video is why it was so much darker than all of its sister shows, and unfortunately I couldn't find as succinct of an answer as I would have liked. I reached out to James with the Watchtower database, since if anyone has an answer from a first-hand source, it's those guys. And we were able to confirm something that I suspected for a while but was never able to verify. So to make a long story short, this may surprise some of you given the high quality of the show, but no one really wanted to make a teenage Batman show. This came about when the crew behind Batman the Animated Series, the new Batman Adventures, and Superman the Animated Series were essentially ordered by higher-ups to make a show about Batman in high school to make him more hip and relatable to the youths. Yeah, you heard that right, this show is an editorial mandate. But instead of making something awful and phoned in like most editorially mandated projects end up being, they managed to find a pretty good workaround and set it in the future with a successor to the mantle, rather than being a teenage Bruce Wayne like I imagined the suits had intended. So needless to say, no one was particularly enthused about this project, but would still put in the effort regardless. So the bleak tone and outright nightmare-inducing episodes were done pretty much as a proverbial middle finger to the executives. That said, as far as why Earthmoving was a rotting corpse or why the Lost Soul face was so off-putting, those two questions will forever remain a mystery unless some fan can find some obscure interview or somehow ask one of the writers directly. So yeah, I'm honestly surprised I didn't end up with more childhood trauma, all things considered. That being said, was there anything you guys found horrifying that I didn't touch on? Am I just being a big bubble-blowing baby and the stuff isn't disturbing at all? Are my takes just bad and I should feel bad? Let me know down below and do all the fun YouTube things. One last thing, I'd just like to thank the Watchtower database for helping me do research for this video. I would not have been able to come to these conclusions without them. Go check out their channel. They are the foremost DCAU experts, so they are guaranteed to know a few things about all these shows that you've never known before. I still don't have any kind of official outro, so look away from your screen for 20 seconds to reduce eye strain. Peace out.